I'm Adam Moz, and this is Moz Models.
Welcome back. Today, you'll notice we have two radios. We have on the left the X20 Pro, and on the right, my X18, not quite an SE. To be exact, this is a standard X18 fitted with an SE screen. We're not comparing the radios today. What we're going to do instead is talk about Trainer. Now, I've seen a few questions come up around Trainer. The first thing is, what's it compatible with? So the Para Trainer module, that's the Bluetooth trainer, it's in both of these systems, is compatible with any other radio with a Para trainer. So that's going to be your Horus radios, or to be exact, compatible with the Para trainer. It's also compatible with the older Bluetooth trainer modules, at least from the Horus X12 onwards. I'm not sure about the old X9E. That had the first Bluetooth trainer modules. FrSky's been through about 4 variations, of which Para is the best and most recent. They tend to be forward compatible, but and mostly cross compatible. It's just, it gets better if you're working with Para and Para on both sides. You've got high-speed Bluetooth with good resolution. It works pretty well, except for there's a little bit of a reconnect dance you have to do when you first power on the radios to get it playing. But it's not model specific, just to be clear. It is system specific, at least up to 1.4.12, which both of these radios are on. There's going to be major changes to the trainer subsystem in 1.5. That brings SBus and PPM input on the module-based support. My recommendation is 1.5 and onwards. If you're going to do a lot of training and you're not using external RF modules on your instructor radio, get an FWTM Lite. That's going to be the best trainer experience that FrSky can deliver today. Para is very good, but there's a couple of niggles in it in terms of quality of life. It's not about the technology. The technology is fine. It's the quality of life. It's specifically the need to manually reconnect when you fire everything up, rather than just having it bind and link like a receiver, which FWTM does. Because FWTM fundamentally is a receiver in a box. But there's a couple other limitations we're going to get into. The first one is Para's limited to 8 channels. It only transfers 8 channels. Technically, if you're using PPM over the wire, you can do 16. I do not recommend you try it. You might as well consider this good old-fashioned wired to be limited to 8 channels as well. The reason for that is PPM timing. There's a couple of ways to get more than 8 channels out of PPM without having ridiculous levels of lag. They run into the case where max channel values can actually conflict, and the two peaks of the PPM signal can become one, and then you get garbage data. For that reason, I recommend don't ever run more than 8 channels over PPM. The trainer system in ETHOS actually supports 16 channels, but that's not going to be fully realized until we get SBus input for trainer in 1.5. Now, that brings up an interesting question. What do you do if you need more than 8 channels in your trainer? For example, you have a complex aircraft you're introducing somebody to. They're an accomplished pilot, but maybe they're not used to flying something with multiple flight modes, retracts, flaps, alternate mixing, and you've got a complex model, and your base model is using more than 8 channels of control. In this case, you can't just take over the channels of trainer because you've only got 8. There are a couple ways to get around that. So I've got on the X20 Pro, I have my new 1.2 meter T28 Trojan, and I set this thing up in the most ridiculous way possible. This comes out of the box set up for a 6-channel receiver with flight modes on channel 7 or higher. The only thing that isn't Y-cabled in this thing out of the box is the throttle, because it's a single-engine aircraft. And so it's got Ys on, and the rudder. Or sorry, no, the elevator. It's a single elevator servo. But there are 2 rudder servos in this, one for the nose wheel, one for the tail. There are 2 ailerons, 2 flap servos, 3 retract servos. And what I've done is I've gone and set that up so every single servo is on its own channel. That's a total of 11 channels of servo or retract control, as well as I have 2 channels of stabilizer control because I put a TD-SR12 in this. It's actually using every port on that TD-SR12. There's 11 servos plugged in. The additional port is I'm using an ESC telemetry converter to get avian telemetry out of the avian light ESC that this came with, and that's going in. So that's got one. It takes 1 port for control, runs on S-Bus, so I'm transferring all 16 channels of control, and then it's got another one for S-port telemetry because the RC Light Systems ESC telemetry converter, at least on the firmware, most recent firmware I have on mine, doesn't do F-Bus. It only does S-Bus, PWM plus S-port, and S-Bus plus S-port when you're talking to FreeSky. It works with multiple systems. It's a really neat little unit, but for my purposes, it's 1 wire in from the ESC, 2 wires out to the receiver. That's the 12th channel port. So you'll notice, let me just bring this over and we'll zoom in and we'll look through my programming. So first off, I've got my ailerons, channels 1 and 5, elevators on 2, throttle on 3, rudders on 4, then flaps are on 6 and 7, gear is on 8, 9, and 12, nose wheel is on 11, and that's a free mix with the source of the rudder, and then I've got a nose wheel trim, that's on my T6 trimmer, gain on the T5 trimmer, that's channel 13, stabilizer mode is on 14, and that is using a channel as a source. So you can see this is just at the lower right. That's my SB. That's my stab mode on every one of my setups, and you can see that one changing. And I've got sorry, that's a VAR mix there, because I also have a panic setting on this. I'll just quickly show that. So you can see I have SI. If I press SI, I can't press that right now because that's on the back of the radio. It's sitting on the table. So if I press SI, I get panic. And then SB controls my stabilizer modes. And I'll just get in there and show them. The reason SI is the top one is because SI will override VAR mixes. This is a priority stack. So the highest true one, oh, interesting. We got police rolling by the looks of it. I happen to live near 13 Division headquarters, so they cut through the neighborhood occasionally, and once in a blue moon, they chirp the siren instead of actually stopping at the 3-way stop. But getting back to the radio, so we've got SI as an override. This is priority. So the top true value is the value you get. So you can see if you saw SB go and then SI overrides. SB is still true, but the higher priority SI overrides. That was just me. I was lifting this up, pressing the SI. That's the left rear back momentary on this radio, on the tandem radios. It's the same on all the tandem ones. And you can just see that change as I press it, and you can see it go. It goes bold. SB mid doesn't stop being bold. That's the priority stack taken over. Okay, so that's what I've got. You can see this is a stupidly complex one. We'll get into these last 2 mixes at the bottom because they are actually to deal with limitations of the trainer system in how it applies the channels received from the student radio to the instructor radio when it's active. So let's zoom back out. We're going to go here and back. And I have a trainer model set up here, and we'll zoom in on this one. And so you'll notice what I've done here. I've done one thing in particular, and I do have dual aileron set, and they're set to ailerons channels 1 and 9. And the reason for that is so that we can demonstrate the channel range limitation. There's elevators are on channel 2, throttle is on channel 3, rudders are on channel 4, flaps are on channel 5, gear is on channel 6, gain is on channel 7, and stab mode is on channel 8. And stab mode is set up the same way. Stab mode and gain are set up the same way as they are on the instructor radio. The switch assignments are all the same. Big proponent of set all your airplanes up the same way. If you have to think about what switch did I put this on, and it's a feature you use on more than one airplane, you're doing it wrong. And I'm going to be blunt about that. You're doing it wrong. Your switchology should always be the same. Two airplanes, if you put your flap switch on, doesn't matter which switch you put it on, be consistent. I always have my flaps on SC. I always have my primary flight modes on SB. In a stabilizer setup, that's my stabilizer modes. On my gliders, that's my thermal, my speed, my cruise modes. If I set up a 3D airplane, for example, or an aerobatic airplane, where I've got a bunch of stuff linked to flight modes, that's going to be my 3D, my cruise. Always my primary flight modes are on SB. I actually have to correct it. I've managed to get a couple of planes mixed up on my rates. I've got some rates on SA and some rates on SE. I need to sit down, go through and clean that up so they're all on SE where they belong. The reason for that, very simply, is because some of these were transferred to my Twin X-Lite, and then I brought them back, and the Twin X-Lite has a completely different switch layout in terms of the switch naming. So I don't have an SE, so I put my rates on SA on that radio. SB is, because of that, like, I really have to be careful with that radio. The switch layout is as close as I can get it to it in terms of physical location, but the switch naming is different, and I have to be careful about that, or I get all sorts of messed up. Getting back, so you can see this. Now, let's just bring the X20 Pro back. Let's just zoom out a little bit. What we're going to go do, we're going to go look at the trainer system now. So go back out from Mixer, page over, and Trainer. And you can see this is set up for Master. I don't particularly like the language FreeSky uses. I prefer instructor and student. If it says master here, I'm going to call it instructor. If it says slave, I'm going to call it student. And I'm not, this isn't about the politics. This is about making clear which is the instructor radio, which is the student radio. Master slave is indistinct, because you could say the student radio is the master. It's the one transferring the control. But instructor radio, that's the radio that's bound to the airplane that the instructor is holding. Student radio, that's the radio that is connected to the instructor radio that the student is holding. So I've got trainer mode set to master. The other option is slave or off. I have wireless trainer turned on. We're using the Bluetooth trainer today. Turning it off just means that it takes the input from the DSC port instead of from the para wireless module. I left high speed on. Use normal if you're talking to an older radio that doesn't have the para module, but an older version of the Bluetooth. Local name doesn't matter. You're never actually going to see that right now. It's a setting that is Bluetooth level setting, but doesn't really show up anywhere. So you got a local address. That's largely irrelevant for the instructor radio. It is relevant for the student radio, because when you connect on the instructor radio, you're going to see a list of these addresses, not a local name, unfortunately, but the addresses as implemented right now. And you're going to tap the one that belongs to the student radio. I always connect from the instructor radio. I always try and do everything from the instructor radio. It's just for consistency. You can connect in the other direction, by the way. You can go look up this on the local address on the instructor radio, and then go over to the student radio and connect from there. I'm not going to do that. Again, this is about consistent workflow. Active condition, that is what is your switch position that is trainer on, or logical switch, because you can set something up, for example, so you flip a switch to turn it on, If you flip that switch off or you touch any sticks, it automatically disconnects your back-end control. That's a little bit of advanced programming on FreeSky right now. I do hope that someday they actually add a switch for that. Spectrum doesn't natively in one of their trainer modes, but they're not very specific about what will actually turn that on. Right now I've got SF up, so SF, that's this back one here. So you turn it on and see it go bold, trainer's active. And then you've got 16 channels worth of configuration. By default, the first 4 channels are set up to replace aileron, replace elevator, replace throttle, and replace rudder. And that is not replace the channel. That is replace the analog at the very beginning of the flow. And this is one of the key pieces I'm going to talk about. Trainer can either replace an analog input, that is your 4 sticks, your potentiometers, and your sliders. It cannot replace a switch, it cannot replace a logical switch, it cannot replace the function buttons at the front, only a continuously variable analog input. Your 4 core sticks, your left and right slider, front slider, which is actually, by the way, the front slider is called pot 3 in the radio. It's treated as a potentiometer, not a slider. And then, so it's essentially your 2 sliders on left and right, and then your 2 or 3 pots. Does not replace the trimmer, does not replace switches, only those analogs. This is critical to understand because it directly impacts how you set up the programming for anything that is switch controlled. The good news is this means you can set up your student radio with your 4 core controls, turn off the trims for those controls, and then the rates are controlled fully from the instructor radio. All of your programming is respected. If you have 4 ailerons, that mix will work because you're inserting the student radio data before any of the mixing happens. This is critical because there's only 2 spots you can insert the student radio data. One is before the mixing happens. The other one is if you set one of these, and we're just going to go into my channel 5, always on, replace. Note, you can actually do add, which essentially overlays. So you could have add this, if you add the stick instead of replace, your stick does nothing. But if you start flying it, your and the student radios are both flying the airplane. I don't like add necessarily, because while it gives you a quick override, if the student starts fighting you, you're not going to be able to control the airplane. And then I've got %100, so you can set it up so if you've got a plane that flies on high rates and you never fly it any other way, and you want to take a student up in it, you can set it to 70% and have, or 60%, and have that student fly it in low rates. And then destination, in this case, I pick channels. The channel 6, in this case, I pick channel 63. And just to be clear, this actually didn't need to be set up. I'll get it. I'm going to come back to this. When you replace channels, you're not replacing. It's not like adding another line to the mixer stack. You're not replacing the mixer stack. You're replacing the input to the output stack. So it replaces your whole mixer stack where it flows into the outputs and gets sent over RF. So you can replace any given RF channel, but you only have 8 to start with. This is not hugely valuable for cases where you are trying to replace a switched function or a mixed function. It's perfectly fine for, in this case, something like stabilize razor mode or gain, where I'm just replacing one switch with the other, one output with the other output. So you can see here I have my it's hard to see that. Channel 14, my stabilizer mode. I've got my stabilizer and gain set up so it's just 1-for-1 replaces because they're identically mixed. They're very, very simple setups. But my gear is stupidly complex. So how do I deal with this with the gear? Well, what I do is I go back to that mixer and I'm going to abuse the var mix, because the var mix can give you can do one really cool thing that comes in handy here. So I'm using it as a proxy. The thing is, the var mix can be used as an input selector, selecting between two wildly different inputs and outputting them to a channel. So what I've done here is set up a var mix. The default is SC. The default weight is SC. So that means that whatever it is, I'm flipping SC here on the right, you can see. But when I engage SF, and you're not getting anything, and this is also the biggest issue with this method, when I gauge SF, come on, it selects and it takes trainer 5. One of the optional sources that you can use, actually let's go, is category trainer, and then you get all your trainer channels. Now there'll be 16 there, but only 8 of them are usable, because remember, we're using the wireless trainer, it only sends 8 channels. So, and I've just accidentally set that to trainer 8. We want that back to trainer 5. Or is it trainer 6? Oh, well, we can fix that in a moment. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm selecting the trainer channel as the output, and I'm outputting to channel 63. And then when I go and my flaps missed, you can see that channel 63, flap position, is my input. So this adds one mix to the layer. What it's doing is that mix is selecting between the trainer channel and the physical input on the radio. Caveat. I'm using trainer active is not a system condition you can test for. You can look, if you're sending a 2-position switch over trainer, you can set up a logical switch that looks for, is that 0? If yes, then block out the trainer selection. The reason for that is, of course, if the trainer's active, you're getting plus 100 or minus 100. If the trainer's inactive, then that line automatically goes to 0. So you test for, is it 0? I haven't really worked through the logic of that. I might do that in a further video, but right now just be aware, if you are using this selection method, I would not recommend using it if you're using a actual 2-position switch like I am for trainer here. This is a demo. I would put it on momentary, so if you bump it, you don't accidentally trigger something you're not expecting to. So what we've done here is we've used an input selector to get around the fact that we do not have the ability to replace a switch. And I've done the exact same thing with the gear selection. So gear is currently on SK, and if it goes to trainer, that's trainer 5, and trainer 6 is gear. So that is on 64 and outputs. Now the replace that you saw in the trainer mode doesn't do anything because it happens after all the mixing. So it doesn't mess with anything. I just set those up. I just left those in there as a demonstration. In the case of 5 and 6, those are not replacing anything. 7 and 8 are replacing real channels, 13 gain and 14 stab mode. Now if I was setting this up real, I would not use the gain one, because you don't want, tunable gain is an instructor thing, not a student thing. I'd actually probably put a phantom channel, nail it at 100, and use that as a logic to detect whether or not my trainer's active. Now, let's get this connected up. Okay, so we're going to search devices. Okay, and we've got our list of devices, and if we go here, I'm just going to bring in, so let's just bring this in. Come on, focus. See how that's DO2E, local address? Let's go back here. First one is DO2E. There we go. Now give it a second, and I'm just waiting. There, and we've got green. So, let's zoom back out, and you can see if I move my throttle, rudder, you see all these. These are always the live data you're getting when you're in the trainer system. So don't think you're always sending these out. And I forget what I set gear to on this one. Oh yeah. On my older radios, I use a 2-second pull of the rear momentary left to trigger gear. On the Pro, I use the left rear push on, push off button. That's the little red one on the back left. I actually have moved to using the little red one on the back right as my throttle cut. Because I haven't done my usual 2-pause swap here. I've prepped that. I'm going to take this apart and do that at some point. Okay, so you can see those going. Now let's go back. Let's go over to outputs here. Actually, sorry, I'm going to show you one last thing before we do that, and that is, notice this is channel 9. Notice that despite the fact that I have channel 9 mixed on my trainer one, if we go to, okay, let's go here, outputs. You can see channel 9 is moving here. That's my outputs. It's not coming here. That's to demonstrate limited to 8 channels. Okay, so now let's go over to outputs. You can see, luckily this says all 8, and you can see nothing's happening. Flip the trainer on. Actually, you just saw the gear cycle because my gear was in a different spot. Let's see my core controls, and note that I'm getting dual channel. When I pull my gear to trigger it, and yes, my gear is slowed down. I've used slow on each of the outputs to get scale retraction. That's why I didn't put everything on Y cables. The T28 does not bring all its gear up and down synchronized. The nose gear goes first, and the mains go shortly afterwards. And they're always just a little out of sync on the mains. So what I've done is I've just duplicated that here. And you can see like my stab mode. Note mixer's not changing on stab mode because that's a replace directly at the channel level, whereas gear, I'm replacing and feeding it into the mixer. So you see the mixer changes on my gear. You can also see that my gain is like completely out to lunch. So, as you can see, I've got 13 total channels of control. Every channel up to 14 is in use except for channel 10, which is doing nothing on this one. That's my S-port input, telemetry on port 10. Using all 12 ports on the TD-SR12. And you're getting all the mixing that I have done here on a mildly complex aircraft. And you can see there's my flaps. And yes, I've got my flaps instantaneous. I haven't gotten around to slowing down the flap mixer yet. I'll set that to something like 2 seconds at some point. You can actually tell that I've got a setup issue here because I've just pulled, when I originally did this, I didn't limit my my flap channels to -78, so we'll just go in there and fix that. I've flown this, but I flew this with a couple of Y cables still in it because I didn't have extensions. I needed shorty extensions because the setup that E-flite gave us is the gear wires are long enough to go all the way to the receiver. but the aileron and flap wires need an extension or a Y cable to make it to the receiver. So I just used that so I could fly the bloody thing. We'll see. Yes. I have the same problem on aileron. Let's go fix that. I remember so I don't accidentally overdrive my aileron. And by the way, the reason I'm using 78 here is because this comes out of the box set up for a Spectrum radio. And 78% on a Spectrum radio is, or on a FreeSky radio, is damn near exactly 100% on Spectrum. Oh yeah. See my rudder. And 100% of rudder, I always like extra rudder throw. But, getting back, there you have it. To summarize overall, get 8 channels transferred in para wireless. You can do 16 over the wire. I do not recommend it. You're going to have weirdness if you've got high rates. Leave it at 8 channels. If you've got a more complex model, take advantage of replacing of your analogs, which, by the way, you'll get for free. By default, it comes up with first 4 channels replace analogs. The rest of the channels 5 and up are not set to do anything. So you got to go there. If you want the additional channels, you program them. If you have a single 1-for-1 replacement of something like a flight mode, you can go ahead and set that up as a 1-for-1 replacement. But if you're going to replace something that's triggering multiple stuff, use a VARMix and use because Trainer is a valid source. You can actually set up multiple mixes if you're using complex OpenTX style mixing. Set up so that one of your high mixes is when Trainer is either the control or the Trainer channel. You can use a VARMix for that, as I did. You can use a set of free mixes. There are multiple ways you can do this. And then flow down, use a source to use that as your rates. To use that, if you want to transfer rates, throw rates on a channel. Transfer them on a channel. You don't have to do anything complex on the student side to get complex, to enable complex mixing on the instructor radio. You just need to replace the inputs, and you've got up to 8 that you can do. So take advantage of that. You're going to have to get into a really, really complex aircraft where you get to the point where you're really triggering more than 8 mixes,